Welcome to Couch Quarterbacks.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Couch Quarterbacks podcast, episode number 2. I'm Andrew Rochford. Joined with me, as always, is Ben Steinberg. Ben, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a crappy looking day out, but and football's over. That's always makes me sad.
Officially the off season.
Yeah, 365 more days till next Super Bowl. But we are getting into baseball, even though we're not going to talk about baseball. So pitchers and catchers report in a week. So that's a little fun thing to keep us watching sports. But even though the season's over, there's so much NFL off-season stuff. Like, I'm pretty sure the league officially ends in sometime in March, but right after it ends, it's free agent city and draft, and we're getting into really where championships are won is really in the off season.
Definitely, Stein. And we're going to talk about the Super Bowl in a couple minutes. But to open up this is going to be an NFL recap show. So just kind of recapping the season, some great moments, some great players, maybe some disappointing teams, some disappointing players. But we got a jam-packed episode, a great episode for y'all. But let's hop on into it, Stein, with our opening kickoff, which is kind of like a news and notes from the past week since we last had our first episode, and probably the biggest news besides the Super Bowl is something that actually happened today. Yeah. We're filming this on Friday, and that is J.J. Watt, longtime Texan, 10-year career there, they have mutually part ways, so basically he has been granted his release.
Yeah, it's a sad ending of an era in Houston. A guy who was literally the face of the franchise, probably over a guy like Andre Johnson. I would say Watt is the most important Texan to ever play for them. Career only Texan, but now he has a chance to go play for another team, and we'll see really where that ends up. I mean, right now I've heard reports of him Pittsburgh, going to join his brothers.
Imagine him being on that defense.
Going to join his brothers. I mean, he's not what he used to be. We know that. But he's still a contributor. It's crazy. He actually, for the first time in 3 or 4 seasons, played all 16 games last year, which I thought was very surprising.
Yeah, that's what, to start off his career, he was playing all 16 games, and I think it's either first 4 or 5 seasons, and then the past 4 or 5 seasons, he's missed quite a number of games. I think only 2 seasons where he played in all 16 games, and like you said, he played all 16 this year, only had 4 or 5 sacks on the season. So, I mean, he's 31 years old. He's not the same dominant edge rusher when he won his 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards.
Also, a Walter Payton Man of the Year award, which is a big character thing. This is a guy who has 0 character issues. And it's interesting because, a lot of these guys with character issues are usually the guys who want to be moving teams, demanding, stuff. But Watt really has never been that kind of guy. I think it's just showing how shitty of a situation they have in Houston right now. The fact that a guy with such great character and such, a great work ethic, remember I don't know if you remember the Hard Knocks, but maybe when the Texans were on it, there's this clip, I think on the first episode, where J.J. Watt is literally, after all the lights have been turned off, and everyone went home from practice or a preseason game, he's still out there hitting, and running and working on his, pursuit and everything. So that's just shows how good work ethic he has.
Yeah, I was going to say, that just describes exactly how
maybe he could have been doing it for the cameras, but
no, that's just the type of work ethic he is. A guy that walked on when he was at Wisconsin, and then turned into a first-round draft pick. You said all the things that he did for Houston, not only on the field, but off the field. So that's something that we're going to have to pay attention to this offseason.
And a good football family, too. It kind of led the way for his brothers, and T.J. Watt, just becoming the new, kind of taking up his mantle as one of the better defensive players. And some people even would say he got snubbed, but that's another. We'll talk about that later with the off-season award, or the season awards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so J.J. Watt be looking for a new team. And then the Houston Texans just continue to spiral down out of control.
Yeah, just all sorts of stuff going on with them. They like to say that Jake Easterby is the team vice president, kind of came in about 2-3 years ago I was looking about this guy. He's kind of like what Rich McKay is, for the Falcons. Without a GM or a coach, there's not a lot of direction. And I don't think the owner, McNair, is very hands-on like Arthur Blank. But Easterbay is like the kind of, he's in charge of everything right now. And it just seems like the ship is just, slowly crashing into the Martian soil, as an old teacher of ours used to say, for the Texans and the city of Houston in general. I mean, we are a football podcast, but the Rockets losing their mainstay in Harden, and then the Astros are going to still have targets on their back, even though they still have decent players, So
yeah, so the city of Houston is getting into some rough times right now from the sports world.
They are saying, though, that they do not want to trade Deshaun, which, kind of begs the question, do you think if they don't trade, because they say they're not going to trade him, but something, there could be an offer that they can't refuse.
Well, and also the problem is Deshaun doesn't want to be there.
Yeah,
so.
I was going to say, but do you think that maybe if he doesn't get traded, do you think that he could potentially sit out till his contract's over?
It's definitely a possibility, but I feel like when you're looking at the money sort of things, that it's going to be very hard for him to take away a full season's worth of money and game checks to sit out a season, even though you don't want to play for that team. So that'll probably be one of the biggest storylines going into this offseason and throughout this offseason is the whole Deshaun Watson Houston Texans situation.
Yeah, and the Texans are have just become the laughingstock of the NFL overnight. I mean, this is a team that 2 years ago was beating the Chiefs in in one of the divisional games. Like, how does that happen? That a team can just go down south so quickly in such a short amount of time. And I really think that even though they were, they weren't terrible last season, even though they were the third worst team in the NFL. I think they're going to be the front runners, for the worst team in the NFL, especially if Deshaun does not come back or sits out or something, just doesn't play or see the field at all.
Yeah, if Deshaun doesn't play, then they will most likely be the worst team in the NFL.
Yeah, and I don't mean to slander the Texans. I like the Texans. It's like it's just bad. It's just become bad management,
Definitely. Moving on into some of the other headlines from this past week, of course, our first episode was on the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl was last Monday. The Bucs taking last Sunday's, excuse me, 31-9 victory over the Kansas City
It felt like a
Chiefs.
Monday Super Bowl, though. It felt like if there was going to be a Super Bowl on a Monday, that would be the Super Bowl. It was not an exciting game. I mean, we're going to give credit to the Bucs, though. The Bucs won the game. I figured that they were going to. And, Tom Brady gets the 7th ring. But I think this game was really on the Bucs defense.
Yeah, the Bucs defense to that Kansas City Chiefs offense to not even let them score a touchdown in that ball game. You have to give so much credit to that defense. A lot of people say the missing offensive linemen were a big factor in the ball game, but Patrick Mahomes, no touchdown passes.
Just running for his
life the whole time. Ran for like 500 yards before he got sacked, or ended up throwing a pass, which was a record for any game this season. And it was a game that I went back and forth going into it on who I thought was going to win between the Chiefs and the Bucs, but I did not think on either side of the football, whoever was going to win, I thought it was going to be a close ball game. Yeah. And we just didn't have that.
And I even predicted in our last show, I said that Mahomes was going to have a bad game.
You did. That was a great prediction by you.
And I said Brady MVP, and, Brady did what he needed to do. Wasn't, amazing, but wasn't, didn't do anything bad, there could be some questionable calls in that game. It seemed like the Bucs were getting the benefit of the doubt on some of those calls. Granted, pass interference is pass interference. It's not reviewable. It wasn't reviewable this year, so we can't go back and look at that. And just some jawing back and forth with the Chiefs defense, trying to talk a little smack, and
Tyrann Mathieu and Tom Brady getting into it.
Yeah, and then some of the guys on the Bucs defense, putting up the peace sign to Tyreek and Sammy Walker. That whole I would say Kelsey was the only receiver for the Chiefs that really wasn't even doing anything. It seemed like none of the Chiefs receivers were factors at all in that game.
Yeah, Tyree got a couple of garbage time catches to really boost his stats, but really, I mean, when Mahomes had less than 100 passing yards in the first half, so none of your receivers and pass catchers are going to end up doing well when you have something like that. But we'll talk a little bit more about the Bucs later on in the show when we're kind of wrapping up some of the best moments from the season. Some of the other headlines from this past week: the Saints COVID violations. Stein.
Exciting to announce that the New Orleans Saints have been faced with more COVID violations. Their third team violation. And we are treading new ground here, so it's hard to really. There's no precedent for anything like this, so there's really the punishment. It's like, what is it gonna be? They're saying that basically their previous fine was against Sean Payton for not wearing it improperly wearing a mask, and then Kamara had that entire fiasco, where he. I don't know exactly what he did, but they just found that he was. Improper, not following the guidelines.
Yeah, that's what this is what the third offense is on, is when Alvin Kamara got COVID, ended up missing Week 17. Some of the other running backs were deemed close contacts. They ended up missing that Week 17 game as well. Apparently, he met with someone at the facility that wasn't like one of the team members or something like that. Mm-hmm. But like I said, because that was their third offense, could be bigger fines. You mentioned it. Sean Payton was fined $100,000. The team was fined $250,000 after Week 2 for not properly wearing face coverings. They got fined after a Week 9 win for having a massless celebration, fined $500,000. Also lost a 7th-round draft pick. So it's probably going to be another hefty fine, and then probably a loss of another late-round draft pick or middle-round draft pick.
Yeah, and, no other really teams. I mean, a couple other teams might have had, one offense, but no other team really had, as improper offenses as the Saints had. So the Saints, between their cap hell that they're going through and this COVID stuff, it's gonna be a tough offseason for the Saints, for Mickey Loomis and those guys. And I'm all for it, not all for not doing COVID protocols, but all for, the Saints getting in trouble.
Yeah.
And if they could lose a fourth or fifth round pick, that would be that would just be icing on the cake, Roach.
Our final headline: we knew that this offseason was going to be a crazy one in terms of quarterbacks changing teams, lots of talent in the draft, and then just all the quarterbacks that are going to be free agents. Well, the QB carousel is already starting to spin, Stein, as Russell Wilson went on a couple of interviews this past week, kind of slamming his offensive lineman a little bit for getting sacked all the time. So there's been some uncertainty on whether or not the Seahawks might want to listen to some offers for him.
Which is crazy, to think. A lot of smoke, coming from teams right now. 2 weeks ago we had the big trade of Stafford and Goff between the Rams and the Lions, but the quarterback carousel is just going to be so crazy, especially this year. And I don't know if it's COVID or whatever, but there's just going to be there's not a lot of teams that are really comfortable where they are right now, and it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of watch where guys end up, and even teams with who we think are sturdy. You said like the Seahawks and the Packers. There's questions about Rodgers with the Packers.
Yeah, stuff that came out right after they ended up losing that NFC title game.
Yeah, so Eagles, Bears, Texans, Seahawks, just a lot of noise coming from those guys about what they want to do going forward with quarterbacks.
That's what people are predicting, that there's going to be anywhere from a dozen to even 16 different quarterback changes from last season going into this upcoming season. So, like I said, in terms of especially quarterbacks, it's going to be an absolutely crazy offseason for these teams, and just seeing who the new faces are going to be.
And I mean, we're not in this show, but in a future show, we're going to probably go through every single team and kind of talk about if they're comfortable with their quarterback or not, like who's sitting pretty, who's not with their quarterback. And you would think that more teams would be sitting pretty, but it's kind of the opposite right now. There's maybe 10 teams that are completely comfortable at quarterback right now, long term, even that.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about, especially at this point in the NFL. But let's hop into our next segment, Stein, and we're going to talk about the biggest busts in terms of teams from the season. So Stein and I each picked one team, and we're going to talk about it's a team that at the beginning of the season they were supposed to be good, and then turned out not being so good.
Or throughout the season,
Yeah.
in my case.
Exactly. Well, Stein, if you want to hop into your first pick.
So my biggest team was one team that I thought, over the course of the season was just gaining momentum, looking super scary, and that'd be the Pittsburgh Steelers, Roach. They were just they were firing on all cylinders. Everything was going for them. Offense, was working. Didn't have a run game, but they didn't need it because they had Big Ben throwing to some really good young receivers, and Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, and of course Juju.
Mm-hmm.
And James Washington. You can't forget about him too. The four good receivers, decent tight ends. Nothing to write home about. Ebron kind of had a decent year. Kind of turned it around.
Great red zone target.
Yeah, just playing good. One of the better tight ends, I would say, and just. And then a team defense led by, T.J. Watt looking amazing. One of the best, young defenses. Really that blue-collar, typical Steelers defense that they love to pride themselves on, with Edmonds in the secondary and Minka, of course, too.
They all sorts of players in that Pittsburgh defense. One of the best in the league, and they have been for a long time now.
Yeah, and it just seems like they're not bad on defense ever. It just seems like they are. And going up to week 13 undefeated. And a lot of people are saying that they had some easy wins. Well, no, they swept the Ravens, who by all accounts were one of the better offenses and obviously a playoff team, beat the Titans and then beat the Browns too. So, you beat these playoff teams. I mean, yeah, you had some wins against the Jets and some,
I mean, everyone's going to have those. They're on your schedule. You're going to have a couple of easier weeks than others.
Beat the Bengals, and I mean, yeah, they didn't play the Chiefs, and they didn't sweep the Browns. In fact, they got embarrassed by the Browns in their last game, even though they were resting their starters. But I would say their biggest loss would be the Bills, but they're the third seed coming into the playoffs. They had that first seed, which seemed like it was almost like ironclad. They just had to keep winning. But, just fall to the third seed, end with a 12-4 record, which is nothing to scoff at, but just really wasn't their potential, Roach, and they lose their first round game to the Browns. And they just were disappointing all around.
That's what I think the biggest reason why they were so disappointing is because they had that undefeated start to the season, and then they have the 1-4 finish. They go stumbling into the playoffs and end up losing in their first game to their division rival.
Yeah, and
in
a
the
team
Cleveland
that's
Browns.
team that hasn't won a playoff game, since
the 90s.
Exactly, and then not even this exact current iteration of the Browns. So it's just, and the fact that they had a lot of distractions happen too. Juju's antics. Is Juju becoming the next AB? I hope not.
I mean, Juju could be gone. He's a free agent this offseason,
and then even Claypool,
I don't think Pittsburgh fans
even
want
Chase
him back.
Claypool is starting to become a little bit of starting to say some stuff on social media, and it's these receivers of theirs that are starting to talk and really hurt the team. The Browns is the Browns,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Browns the Browns beat you. This is a team that had a chip on their shoulder and beat you. You guys are just pathetically lazy right now, and you're getting beat by teams that you have better talent. And there's going to be a lot of questions in this offseason. Like you said, Juju, is he going to come back? And then Big Ben, that's, it seems like it's always a question, but he had a good year, better year than years past. He's been injured in years past and actually was decently healthy this year. And, he's getting up there. He's, up there with, we're seeing Breeze and Rivers retire. Obviously Brady's Brady, but it's just Big Ben is
Brady's in his own category. But.
Yeah, so it's gonna be a question mark, and if they lose a guy like Big Ben, I really think they'll take a step back, even though they do have weapons and a good defense.
And that's what they're losing Pouncey at center. Both Pouncey's actually are retired today. Another big news in the NFL. But yeah, the biggest thing for the Steelers is just they start out so good. They limp into the playoffs. They lose that first round game, and they've got so many question marks going into the offseason.
Yeah,
So
and that running game, that last year was great, was kind of their calling card. Really, this year it was the passing game. You know, they didn't run the ball as much at all.
They couldn't run the ball, so Big Ben was just
throwing.
They
couldn't. Yeah.
Big Ben was just throwing the ball short, just throwing slants and getting the ball out in like under 2 seconds, and that was basically the run game was short little pop passes and just quick slants. But yeah, the Steelers, after such a great start, very disappointing end to their season.
Yeah.
My team for one of the biggest busts from this season is the Philadelphia Eagles. After winning the division championship in 2019, we're 9-7. They go 4-11-1, and they were last in the worst division in football this past season, the NFC East. And probably the biggest reason for them being so bad, well, two things. One, they kind of go hand in hand. One was Carson Wentz just spiraling out of control, ended up losing his starting job at the end of the season. And then two, one of the biggest reasons why Wentz was so bad was because the offensive line was absolutely terrible. They had 65 sacks allowed, 50 sacks from Wentz, which was leading the NFL, a stat that you don't want to be leading the NFL in that sort of category. They had injuries all over the place on the offensive line. And you see Wentz, who last year was a 4,000-yard passer, 27-7 touchdown to interception ratio, and that's with no receiver having over 500 yards on offense for them.
The pizza guy, playing receiver for them.
He plays in just 12 games this past season. Like I said, he ends up getting benched at the end of the season. A 16-15 touchdown to interception ratio. And he's probably out of Philly and going to be starting, or at least on a different team.
Yeah,
next season.
Definitely. He's one of the big guys on the quarterback carousel, and just not great looks for the Eagles all around. It's kind of like they almost sold their soul for that championship. They thought the future was bright, but the big thing, Coach Doug Peterson goes down with the ship. It's kind of like in Atlanta or Jacksonville or any other city, I think that Peterson is still the coach of the Eagles or whatever team that is in that city.
Yeah,
but the fact that it's Philly, this is a guy who won you a Super Bowl. He's been shown the door after things that really haven't been in his control. I mean, I guess Wentz's development is kind of been that's kind of the main one, but you have injuries and you have receiving core that is never healthy, and that when it is, it's not that good. I mean, you got to look at the front office really there instead of your coaching. I mean, it's just scenarios that we're out of his control, and I think Peterson will definitely get a coordinator job someplace, but it sucks that they were that they had to pull the cord on him.
That's one of the biggest things in the draft from last season. They end up drafting Jalen Reagor. They needed help at receiver. He ends up having a very injury-riddled season, only had just under 400 yards receiving, only one touchdown. And they draft Jalen Hurts, which was the biggest question mark in the second round they draft him. And it turns out to maybe be a better move than you thought, just because if Wentz isn't going to be there, Hurts played well in those couple of games, that small sample size that he had as the starter. So
I mean, Hurts played well, but he's not what Wentz was. The potential that Wentz had.
But he at least went in there and performed better than Wentz was this past season.
Yeah, whatever is going on with Carson Wentz, he needs like a Kyrie Irving-esque cleanse of his chakra or aura, and maybe just a change of scenery could really help the kid. Because he's still young. He has experience and he's had success. He doesn't have playoff experience because Nick Foles, which is funny because that's actually one of the big trades that's been talking is the Bears trading Foles to back to Philly for Carson Wentz, which I think
like the 8th time Foles has been on the Eagles.
Back to the team he won the Super Bowl with. So that's really interesting that we could see that happening. And I want to see Wentz succeed because I really like his story. He's a guy who went to a Division 2 school and has succeeded in the NFL. He's not those blue chip guys from USC that are always overrated. No, he's this guy from a small school, a small good school, and Trey Lance coming out this year is very similar from North Dakota State. So I really like the small school aspect and the fact that he's also a ginger. too.
That's the only thing you like about him, huh?
Yeah, and I've always liked him, even though he's an Eagle, and I don't necessarily like Eagles because Wentz is also kind of like he's not a diva or anything, and I understand that he probably wants to get out of there because of just the mismanagement that's been going on, with. And who was that third quarterback they trotted out against the Redskins or the Washington football team?
I'm not sure.
What was his name? The guy that everyone.
Nate Sudfeld?
Maybe. I'll look that up real quickly. But yeah, they brought out that third quarterback against the Washington football team in that last game of the season. I don't know if you remember the primetime game.
Yeah, I think Nate Sudfeld, but I'm not 100% sure.
Was that the nail in Peterson's coffin?
I think
it is Sudfeld.
Pretty much the whole season was a nail in Peterson's coffin, just with the underperforming, coming off the division championship, and one of the other things they're definitely going to need more receiver help because after having no 500-yard wide receiver last season,
I thought Rager was just another Aguilar. I mean, their names kind of even sound similar, Aguilar, Rager. It's like. You gotta. They should have went after one of those Bama guys, that were drafted later, like a Judy or a Ruggs.
But that's what Travis Fulgham had 539 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns, but the majority of that was in 4 games early in the season. Goddard and Ertz were both hurt throughout the season. Deshaun Jackson was never healthy, so...
Why were they still trying to throw to Deshaun Jackson or Alshon Jeffrey? I just don't even know.
Alshon Jeffrey's still on that team.
I don't even know. And when we get to the mock draft, I love Jamar Chase or a guy like Devontae Smith to these guys because they just need that big play, receiver to really help, Jalen Hurts. I guess because that's going to be their quarterback moving forward, not Sudfeld. So
yeah. So that was 2 of the biggest busts in terms of teams from this past season. Now let's look at some of the most surprising teams.
Yeah.
And Stein, you've got one that I don't think a lot of teams predicted them to win this division.
No, the Washington football team, the team formerly known as the Washington Redskins, and that's kind of where I want to start is really the offseason of distraction that went on for this team. I mean, this is a team that really got, marred by the media for their image and their team name, all during the last summer. A lot of social justice going on in the world and a lot of change, and the name Redskins was really seen as a relic of the past and offensive, so a team that's definitely a distraction because this is the team that's their image, that's what they're known as, and there's a lot of folks in that office that's kind of where they come from. That's where they come from. And Dan Snyder had some stuff going on too. Still unsure as to kind of the whole story, but there was some sexual harassment allegations from other people in the front office. Stuff with cheerleaders, all sorts of crazy stuff going on, and apparently still hasn't been solved yet, but that's just more distractions. But this is a team that comes out and amongst COVID and just really, showed improvement in a lot of areas of their game, Rich. I mean...
Especially on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah. Ron Rivera is a great... And Ron Rivera had freaking cancer. So, their head coach has a cancer diagnosis.
Just all sorts of off-the-field issues that they had to deal with, including being a 3-13 team from last season.
Yeah, and literally one of the worst teams, kind of just an embarrassment to the league. And really this year, just come back and... their uniforms, as simple as they were kind of slick. I'm not going to lie. It's hard to mess up golden Garnett, but really come out, win the NFC East at 7-9. Not nothing to write home about.
I mean, like I said, that with the NFC East with the Eagles, they're just none of the teams were that good.
Yeah. But still win that division and even beat the Steelers, an impressive win, and just were pretty decent all around. Offense, though, was just awful for the Redskins or the Washington football team. It still takes time to get used to that. Third worst in yards per game at 317 yards per game. I mean, I think that just goes to their quarterback carousel kind of still happening. I mean, they had about 4 quarterbacks all season. One of them, is not even on the team anymore, and that would be Dwayne Haskins, who got released and really was
what a fall from grace for him.
Yeah, he was definitely a huge distraction. Alex Smith, comeback player of the year, great story. I don't think he's gonna be the savior of the franchise. But
yeah, he's another guy they're probably going to move on from. Might have to settle for a backup job if he wants to continue his playing
just
career.
the fact that he was able to come back on the field though after his injury is such a great story.
Between him and Rivera, such a great great
exactly.
stories.
Kyle Allen, just kind of Rivera's backup, I guess. The guy that every coach wherever they go always has their backup quarterback they bring with them. Kyle Allen was, and then the crazy. Which I think they might be putting the cart before the horse, is Heineke. Taylor Heineke really looked good in that one playoff game against the Bucs.
They actually re-signed him to a
I was going to say,
deal.
They might be putting the cart before the horse, and they might want to draft a quarterback just to give him some competition, but looked good in that one game.
He's one of those guys, he's a solid backup, and he's great to bring in when your starter gets hurt or is struggling.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Case Keenum a little bit, just a small guy who runs pretty kind of well, a little bit shifty, and really has a good heart, I think. And, we saw that in the playoff game where he scored that 20-yard scramble and reach for the pylon. So that was an amazing little story. And I hope the success, but was really their two biggest successes on offense were Antonio Gibson and Logan Thomas. Kind of the emergence of those guys. Gibson become one of the better rookie running backs, and then Logan Thomas, a guy who
Converted quarterback,
yeah, big guy, really turning into one of the better tight ends. So had a good year. But I mean, what really made them surprising was their defense, Andrew, and that second in yards allowed at just 304 a game, and was really a cool stat, was second in pass defense at only allowing 191 yards passing. So, their defense, all facets. And when we think of the Washington defense, we think of their front seven, led by like Payne and obviously Rookie of the Year Chase Young, but their secondary was good too, even better, than their rush defense. So.
And I think they'll definitely have a chance at least to contend once again in the division, just because we just talked about how the Eagles were and all the question marks they have. You don't know what's going on with Dallas, with Dak, whether or not he's going to be coming back. So there's still a lot of question marks in the NFC East. So I think that Washington, because of that defense, will still have a chance to contend in the division.
Yeah, I think their defense is solid. Their run game is developed. I think all they really need to do is, we didn't even, there was Darius Geis. We didn't talk about that. That was another distraction.
Mm-hmm.
So they just need to have a distraction-free offseason and just, focus on quarterback and their receiving core. Terry's decent, but Terry's not like, I'm sure he could use some help. So it's not a terrible outlook for a team that, maybe 2 years ago we were writing off as dead. So.
Definitely. My pick for the most surprising team from this past season was the Miami Dolphins. They were 10-6 on the season, just missing out on the playoffs. There was a bunch of teams from the AFC that finished with a 10-6 record, but this is a team that was 5-11 last season. They lost, and that includes winning 4 out of 5 of their last games. So that really improved their overall record from the 2019 season. In the offseason, they end up drafting Tua. They signed Jordan Howard, signed Matt Breida. But really, none of those guys had a big impact on the offense, as it was really Ryan Fitzpatrick that was the better quarterback this season. Myles Gaskin, a guy that was a third-string running back going into the season, ends up having almost 1,000 scrimmage yards between rushing and receiving. And then they just had a much improved defense led by Xavier Howard, who led the league with 10 interceptions on the season. So this was a team that went from a bottom dweller to just missing out on the playoffs.
Yeah, another team that similar to the they were drafting really high last year and years prior, and starting to see some of those dividends pay off. Really, the entire culture change for the Dolphins, especially now that the AFC East is pretty much wide open.
Brady-less AFC East for the first time in 20 seasons.
The Bills are definitely huge contenders, but I could see the Dolphins competing for that wild card, and it maybe eventually, trying to compete with the Bills for that AFC East title.
Yeah, and that's what, just like the Washington football team, the defense was another big story for this Miami Dolphins in terms of changing their success. The 2019 defense allowed the most points out of any team in the league. They allowed the third most yards. The 2020 defense improved to the sixth fewest points allowed, and they had the third best turnover difference with +9. And like I mentioned with Xavier Howard, 10 interceptions, leading the league.
I'm sure if Minka was on that team, then he
wouldn't have
left to go to Pittsburgh, who I think is trending in the opposite direction, at the end of the season. And it just, we had some guys emerge. We kind of see this every year, Roach, I think, is there's always a tight end that kind of takes that next step. Let's say it was a couple years ago it was Kittle, and after Kittle was Waller. Mm-hmm. And now I think it's got Mike Gesicki. I think Mike Gesicki is kind of that next good young tight end really to come out, and really had a good year, 53 catches for 700 yards about with 6 TDs. I'd say, you can definitely improve on that. Be a 10 touchdown guy, be a 1,000-yard maybe receiver in the coming years. So
yeah, you don't see that too often with 1,000-yard receiver, 10 touchdowns, especially for the tight end position. But definitely taking a little bit of a step up from his good 2019 season. The Jordan Howard stat line, before we move on, I just got to mention that. It was kind of a running joke for us all year, but his career in Miami will not be a notable one. Well, it might be a notable just because of how laughable it is. 28 carries for 33 yards. But did have 4 touchdowns because they used him as a goal line back.
Averaging a touchdown every 7 carries. That's pretty funny.
But that's his stat line after every single game would be like 6 carries for 8 yards and a touchdown, or 9 carries for 5 yards. But he had the touchdown.
Yeah.
So just the prototypical goal line type back where you get down to the 1 yard line, you bring him in, and he most times will put that into the end zone.
I wonder what his betting numbers were looking like. I wonder what his over-under rush yards were looking like, maybe 10?
It'd probably be better off to try and bet the over on his rush yards instead of trying to bet for a touchdown, because they probably put it where he was getting a touchdown just about every game that he ended up playing in. So.
Yeah. And then, but the problem is with the Dolphins, and I think it's going to be a problem going forward. It's other parts of developing, but it's kind of similar to Washington is the quarterback, Roach. Mm-hmm. And that's where it comes down to 2 guys, where it's Tua versus Fitz. A guy
or the field with them having the number 3 pick.
Or the field, that's true. Or the draft or the free agent market.
Yeah, so, that's what there's been a lot of talks on whether or not Tua is going to be the future of this franchise, whether they want to trade him. They do have the number 3 pick, so could they go quarterback, get a Justin Fields, Zach Wilson?
I love how their number 3 pick is from the Texans. That's just rubbing salt in the wound of a Texans team
just kind of sums.
That's falling off a cliff, and the fact that a third overall pick, especially when you're about to lose your quarterback like the Texans are, you could be spending that on a guy like Justin Fields or Trey Lance or Zach Wilson, but nope, you're gonna get the Dolphins are getting your pick, and they could get Penei Sewell, they could get Jamar Chase, they could get a quarterback.
Yeah, there's a lot of different directions that they could go with having that number 3 pick, and I think it all really depends on what the Jets do with the number 2 pick. But.
Yeah. But you were saying that Fitzpatrick was the better player than Tua?
Oh, hands down. There were games where Tua would start out the game, Fitzpatrick would come in, and he'd end up leading the team to a victory. I'm pretty sure in that wild Raiders-Dolphins game, which we'll get into later, didn't Fitzpatrick? I'm pretty sure he came off the bench in that game and was the one that led them to come back in that game. Obviously, he had that pass, but I'm pretty sure Tua was the one that started that game. So there's a couple of times where Tua went down with an injury or just was ineffective. Fitzpatrick came in and kind of saved the day in very Fitzmagic type fashion.
I don't want them to sell their souls on Tua just yet. I don't want them to give up Tua just yet. Yeah, I still think Tua has a future as a Dolphin.
That's what he's played in 5 games so far.
Yeah,
so
I don't want the Josh Rosen effect to happen to a guy I like Tua. I never liked Rosen. But I like Tua, so I want to see Tua really have a chance to succeed. And that's the problem with the current NFL right now. One of the big problems is these teams are so quick, and the media is so quick to be like, let's get rid of this guy. He's not Patrick Mahomes. No, you got to let these guys give it time to develop, And yeah, if he ends up like Mitch Trubisky after 2 or 3 years and, becomes a complete like laughing stock, then yeah, it's time to get rid of him. But I mean, don't just sell the farm, because he's gonna, if you give him away, he's just gonna go marinate someplace and not, he's not gonna see the field.
It's definitely risk reward, because you look at something like that where five games of a sample size, and he had some glimpses of success, and they're wanting to sell on him.
I mean, granted, he's not looking like what I thought he could look like, but I still think it's too early to give up on him.
You see guys like Jimmy G, who in a small sample size, and he ends up getting a max contract, and now you see the 49ers, the situation that they're in. So it's a very risk-reward type thing on whether you want to sell out on a guy or commit to him long-term.
I mean, he's not Herbert-esque, in terms of his rookie season, but he wasn't – I would say he wasn't in the same scenario that Justin Herbert was.
Well, speaking of Justin Herbert, we talked about some surprising teams. Let's talk about some more surprising players in terms of their success from this past season. A lot of rookies that we have compiled on this list, but just some guys that kind of overperformed our expectations.
Yeah, and let's start off with Justin Herbert, that I personally thought was overshadowed by some of the other quarterbacks in his class. Talking about Tua, talking about Hurts, and talking about Joe Burrow. Herbert was, by all accounts, the number 4 or number 3 quarterback for those guys, for some of those teams, and really came into a rough situation. The guy that didn't have a chance to sit behind anyone and learn the system. A team that fired their coach, and Anthony Lynn.
The Chargers that have just kind of been a very almost toxic situation, a toxic franchise for the past couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think they're as bad as they once were, but just a guy comes in and does what he needs to do, Roach. Just really was looking great. I'm pretty sure he set a couple rookie records. And then wins Offensive Rookie of the Year. Some people say that Justin Jefferson should have won, but I mean, people love the quarterback position. It's L.A. Ooh, the glitz and glamour of L.A. And I honestly think that Herbert is going to be kind of a mainstay for the Chargers, kind of like Phillip, was. I don't necessarily think he's going to be that guy to win them Super Bowls, but I think he's just going to be a consistent Matthew Stafford, Phillip Rivers-esque starting quarterback who's going to put up good numbers, and I think will be a fantasy target next year.
That's what one of the best parts about Herbert's season is. As good of a season he had, I just love how he ended up getting the starting job when he did. I think he was eventually going to take over as a starter, but with Tyrod Taylor having to, right before, in a pregame, declared out. He gets
an injection in the wrong, in his lung or something.
Yeah, he ends up puncturing his lung because he had a rib injury, I'm pretty sure, and he gets a punctured lung, and that's when Justin Herbert steps in there, and he was great from the get-go.
Yeah, and I like Tyrod Taylor, and it sucks that he's one of the most unlucky quarterbacks. I don't know if you've ever watched and heard his stories, but just the fact that he's had success, but he's just always a weird situation. And a weird situation always causes him not to start, and someone else to come in there.
I mean, he was on some bad Bills teams. He was on a bad Browns team.
Yeah.
So.
Speaking of Bills, my second, another surprising player was Josh Allen. There was talks that Allen still needed another year, and if this was going to be his last year to really develop, well, he really took that final step this year, and he was a legit MVP candidate, a guy who's going to be throwing the ball for, 300 plus yards a game, 2-3 touchdowns, just looking really, really good, really solid. And I just think will be what's surprising though is the fact that a lot of people were saying that this was his kind of make or break year, and a lot of people were kind of leaning on that break. Well, he made, the best of it.
I really liked Josh Allen, not only on draft night, but going into the season. I drafted him in a lot of my fantasy leagues as my starting quarterback, and he did not disappoint. And one of the biggest differences from last season to this season is the difference in having a number 1 wide receiver. You go from John Brown as your number 1 to Stephon Diggs, and Stephon Diggs up there as one of the best wide receivers in terms of the stats that he put up this past season.
It was an all-around great, offense. I would just say their only bad thing was their running game, which was non-existent.
He was pretty much their leading rusher out there.
Yeah,
so.
and I mean they had combined him with Cole Beasley, who's still producing. It just was a great offense, passing wise, and for them to take that next step, I think they're going to have to incorporate a run game.
Mm-hmm.
But it's bright future for Buffalo, especially with young Josh Allen, who I think will win MVP within the coming years. Honestly, like if Rodgers doesn't have the season he had, I think MVP would be Josh Allen.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Let's look at the two guys that you mentioned earlier, but just
Yep.
bring them up once again real quick with Antonio Gibson, Logan Thomas, a couple of great guys for that Washington football team's offense. You already mentioned a little bit about both of them.
Yeah, both looking really good. Antonio Gibson really emerging as one of the best one of the best. We'll get to the other best rookie running back, and then Logan Thomas, which I think will be kind of placed in that Gesicki, Waller, Kittle role next year.
It doesn't take much to be a top 5 tight end, at least fantasy wise.
I think
in the NFL,
he won't be the best tight end next year, but I think he's going to have to take that step and really get into that top 5 next year.
I think with the injuries to Kittle and to Zach Ertz, some of those other guys that have been mainstays in the top 5.
I think Ertz is done in the top 5 tight end.
Yeah, especially with Dallas Goedert. But I think Logan Thomas ended up being like the tight end 3, tight end 4 in terms of fantasy on the season. So just like you said, a big step for him. A couple of my guys that I put as some surprising players. The first one I might surprise you that he's on the list, but that's Aaron Rodgers, the MVP winner from this past season. If you remember, Stein, even though the Packers had a 13-3 record last season, a lot of guys were saying, is Aaron Rodgers washed? He's 36 years old, 37 years old. He didn't look great last season. He had only 26 touchdown passes in 16 games.
Drafted Jordan Love, and I think that might have been the difference maker.
That was the kick in the ass that he needed to...
That was the fire under his butt that he needed to come out and just light the world on fire with what he did. And a lot of people say he has no weapons. He has a lot. He has weapons.
Devontae Adams,
MVS, and Alan Lazard are all legitimate guys. Now, they're not world beaters. Devontae Adams, I would say, might be that world beater, and MVS and Lazard aren't. But they all have decent.
Roles.
They're still decent receivers, and then a decent running game too to help out. Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, who Jamal Williams. Crazy stat I read on Instagram the other day. I think they said he carried the ball like 300 times in his career. Hasn't fumbled once.
Some sure hands, even with the cold weather up in Lambeau.
Which I thought that was crazy. But yeah, really comes out with motivated. But what's funny is there's rumblings that he doesn't want to stay in Green Bay, or some people are saying that.
Yeah, when we were talking about some of the opening headlines after the NFC title game, kind of very ominous in terms of what he was saying. I think he'll be back in Green Bay next season.
Yeah.
But we'll have to see going on into the offseason. I think one of the biggest things for Aaron Rodgers is this: if he can win that NFC Championship game, because that's the thing that's eluded him.
He's really had that monkey on his back lately, even though he does have that Lombardi for him. It just seems like he's lost every single big situation he's been in, and these are games he's easily could have won. Notorious choking Falcons team. The Falcons embarrassed them, and then last year with literally a defense an offense in San Fran that doesn't do anything, and one of your better teams, you can't beat them. And then this year you have your first home NFC Championship game, and you get 3 picks from Brady in a row, and you can't capitalize. It's like it's not his fault, but.
That's what, at the very least, Rodgers has silenced a lot of the haters in terms of his production and being old and needing to retire and just not being a productive quarterback anymore with the MVP season that he put up. Staying in Green Bay, another guy that kind of burst onto the scene was Robert Tonyan, and he was an undrafted tight end out of Indiana State
Another
back in 2017.
Another guy adding to that receiving core of, people are like, they don't have any names. I'm sorry, they don't have DeAndre Hopkins, but they still have decent receivers.
Yeah, not everyone can trade a second-round pick and get a guy like DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, exactly.
But Tonyan, a guy that in this first couple seasons was just a backup tight end for Green Bay, ends up putting up almost 600 yards receiving. And the more notable stat, 11 touchdowns, just emerged as a red zone target opposite of Devontae Adams, and a big reason why Aaron Rodgers threw for 48 touchdowns this past season.
Yeah, I mean, Rodgers better buy Tunyon a truck or something for winning him that MVP. Just like I said, another guy that to add to their weapons. They're gonna have a fun offseason because they're gonna have to be able to focus on. They have their offense in place. I think they just need to fix some stuff.
That's what Aaron Jones will be a free agent, so it depends on whether or not they want to re-sign him. Do you have Jamal Williams?
I
AJ
heard
Dillon.
something on the radio the other day. It said that you should never re-sign a running back.
Yeah, that's kind of
unless he's a guy unless he's a Saquon Barkley or a game changing running back. If this is a middle of the pack running back like Aaron Jones is. Don't resign him. Don't waste that. Don't waste
that's
the money.
what the philosophy on running backs has been changing mightily.
They're a dime a dozen.
Especially trying to draft some of them in the first round. But that's another topic for another day.
When we talk about the draft and the Falcons and some of the more free agents, we'll talk about Gurley and what the Falcons should do with Gurley. But I'm just like in that boat that these guys really shouldn't spend money for them.
Yeah, and then that's what my final two rookies.
Speaking of running backs,
season. Yeah, James Robinson, the undrafted rookie out of Illinois State, on the Jacksonville Jaguars, gets that opportunity with Leonard Fournette getting cut by the Jaguars, and he ends up being a 1,000-yard rusher, adding another 350 yards receiving, 10 total touchdowns. Just a great season from him in Jacksonville. And
fantasy darling, as you would say.
Yeah, hey, Mr. Robinson.
A little fantasy darling in James Robinson, a guy who's on a bad team, who really, especially if they get Lawrence, could see an improvement on his current stats.
Yeah, that's what... You usually don't see running backs on bad teams be stars. It's usually some sort of wide receiver because they're passing the ball a lot. But Robinson was one of those guys that... Even though it was negative game script, because he was such a good receiver, he put up consistent fantasy days.
And he's also, not a household name. And I don't think he'll ever be a household name because he's on Jacksonville. But he's very under the radar. And the fact that I think he's only going to get better, because he is a rookie, and usually rookies do get better as they go along. I mean, and they're going to add, Trevor to this offense. I mean, this guy is definitely one of the best fantasy targets for next year. I think could be a first round pick. Not a first overall pick, but definitely a first round pick.
Yeah, he'll probably be in one of those like second, third tier type where if someone wants to
I say first round, he's probably going to be, like pick number 11 or something.
Yeah, that's what I would put him more in like the second round. Really anywhere in the second round. Maybe if you could pick him up in the third round, that'd be great.
Here's just a top of my head question. Do you take him or Zeke Elliott?
Zeke. I'd take Zeke.
Okay. I'm just saying though, it's like
Zeke was bad this past season, but I still think that there's some mileage left on those tires.
I don't have any room to speak on this because I've never had Zeke, as you had Zeke last year in your leagues, so I can't really speak on that. But I would be inclined to give him a look over some of the other guys. I mean, we'll talk fantasy. Probably in the summer. Some of our summer shows are probably mostly about fantasy. But another guy who was just ridiculous, and probably my favorite story. I have a lot of favorite stories, but Justin Jefferson, a guy whose older brother played for LSU, Jordan Jefferson, and was a quarterback. He was the quarterback for LSU. A guy who was literally. I was watching a video yesterday. They said he was the 300th something receiver in this class of 2017 recruiting class. This guy is just coming on and just doing things.
Yeah, that's what I think a lot of people expected him to be good, but not this good in his rookie season, as he had 1,400 yards receiving, 7 touchdowns, and after a slow start in the first couple weeks of the season, he finished with 7 games of 100-plus yards receiving, and just really helped that Minnesota Vikings team, who lost Stephon Diggs, just really made them forget him pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, they're like, we improved. We got a guy with better money, a guy with, because Diggs was, having some troubles in Minnesota, some grumblings. a guy who, is not going to have that yet. I mean, I don't think he's the bad character guy, but, this is a guy who's under control for a couple years. You're going to get some good years out of him. Hopefully they can get, everything sorted out in Minnesota. Because by all accounts, Minnesota should be good, but they're not. But, 1,400 yards, really developed a swagger, too. We loved watching him do the gritty dance, where he would just wave his hands and legs. I love that.
It's become kind of an inside joke for Stein and I whenever we see someone doing
Neither
that
of us
dance,
can do it, but we want to learn it. I love him, and I hope that he'll have success with the Vikings and really show that guys who aren't heavily recruited in college, to go to college can succeed and thrive on the NFL level.
All right, let's look at a couple guys who did not perform to the expectations we expected this upcoming season, and one of them we don't have to travel too far. As he was on the Atlanta Falcons, Stein.
Yeah, and that's Todd Gurley, Roach. We were kind of mentioned him earlier. 9 touchdowns. That's nothing to scoff at. 9 touchdowns.
Jordan Howard type numbers, though.
9 touchdowns, but only 678 yards on 195 attempts. This is a guy who was a bell cow back. Really didn't have anyone, under him. Hill and Ito Smith. That's not.
3.5 yards a carry.
Averages 3.5 yards a carry, and of course, played 15 games, which is crazy for a guy who's struggled with injuries in the past couple of years.
I think he was on the injury report just about every single week.
Yeah, maybe he might have had like 2 or 3 carries in a couple games, but still played every game but one game. It really wasn't worth. What didn't become the bell cow back that we kind of thought he was going to be.
He was a gamble for the Falcons. Signing a guy on a 1-year deal, like you said, he had the
guy with
the
injury
knee
questions. Yeah.
So you didn't really know what you were going to get for him, whether or not he was going to be able to take that 3 down.
And then the season low light obviously would be when we were playing the Lions. Falcons had about 2 minutes, to go. Just needed to waste some clock. We were in the red zone. And the Lions literally, it seemed like it parted the Red Sea, Roach. He just, the perfect hole. Every running play, there's always a hole. But this hole was giant. And he hit that hole and just kept going. And then you were like, Todd, get down. Falls down at the 1, but ball goes over the goal line, touchdown. We give the Lions the ball back with too much time to score.
The best part about that play is that you have the Matt Ryan mic'd up where he's saying, listen, fall down no matter what. Like, if they let you go through, just fall down.
Just fall down on the 1 yard line.
2 seconds later.
They'll literally waste like 40 seconds of play to run a fullback dive or halfback dive up the center. Like,
just set up for the field goal as time expires.
Exactly. And the Falcons lose that one, which ultimately might have helped them, draft position-wise, but I think that game was kind of like the breaking point for the Falcons. Another disappointing player who I'm really sad to say was disappointing for me because I kind of had him as taking that next step was Drew Lock.
Yeah,
sophomore slump, if I've ever seen one.
He was kind of a guy that people had under the radar going into the season. Were picking him to be a lot better than he ended up performing. The 16 touchdowns, 15 interceptions.
And only about 3,000 yards passing. And he played 13 games. Of course, we remember that game with the Broncos where they were throwing out a receiver, at quarterback.
They had guys like Brett Rippon start. They had a college wide receiver starting at quarterback.
Gosh, just a weird thing for them. And Drew Lock, just sophomore slumps of all sophomore slumps. So bad, in fact, that there's even questions about who's going to be the quarterback in Denver.
Just another team.
Just another team on the quarterback question. Yeah.
Speaking of quarterbacks, here's once again another team that's going to have questions going into next season. Kind of similar to Todd Gurley in terms of a guy that's had production in the past, sign him to a 1-year deal and see what he can do, and it just didn't pay off.
Deal.
That's Cam Newton, as he was the 2015 NFL MVP, guy with a Super Bowl appearance. Ends up being the heir to Tom Brady and just did not play well for the Patriots.
No, this is a guy that all the Patriots fans were getting a former MVP and a guy who's we've seen regress, partly because of his injury, but we thought still had something left in the tank. You just come out there, throw 2,500 pass yards. Did
8 touchdowns in 15 games played.
Yeah.
8 passing touchdowns as a starting quarterback is just, you don't hear about that anymore in today's day and age of the NFL.
Those aren't even Big Ten numbers,
Like, the running backs way back in the day when the ground game was dominant in the NFL.
Yeah.
But 8 touchdown passes in the passing age of the NFL, just unheard of.
Yeah.
Had 10 interceptions, did have 600 yards rushing.
I'd say was a decent running quarterback.
12 rushing touchdowns as well, so that kind of made up for his bad passing numbers. But still, the Patriots end up missing the playoffs just for the second time since 2002.
Yeah.
And this was even a project that Bill Belichick could not fix.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I think Cam is done, potentially as a starter. Could play backup if he wants to, but I don't think he's
a backup job.
I don't even think if that's his style. Literally, his shoulder injury has just really not made him the same passer that he once was. The same threat he once was really is just not there anymore. And speaking of someone that is what he wasn't, I messed that up. I can't talk today. James Conner for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Roach.
Yeah, that's when 2018, he was a guy that was a 1,500-yard back in terms of 1,000-yard rusher, 500-yard receiver, 13 total touchdowns in 13 games. And we mentioned earlier about the Steelers, one of their biggest downfalls at the end of the season was they couldn't run the football. And James Conner, of course, being the starting running back there, was a big factor in that. He was almost another 1,000-yard combined guy. He had 900 yards total on the season, 6 touchdowns in 13 games, but you just saw games where he absolutely disappeared. In week 1, Benny Snell, 19 carries for 113 yards. James Conner, 6 carries for 9 yards. I'm pretty sure I started him week 1 and ended up losing because of that performance.
Yeah.
And he's a guy that we thought, being from Pittsburgh, going to Pittsburgh for college,
cancer survivor.
Yeah, that he was going to be the running back 1 in Pittsburgh for a long time. And I think there's a lot of question marks for Pittsburgh this offseason on whether or not he's the future guy.
I personally don't see him as the future guy, honestly. Like I said, don't spend money on don't re-sign a running back, and if his deal's going to be up soon, then...
And he's another guy that's had some injury problems. They talked about going into this season, his workload, trying to manage that, as he's had knee issues as well. So he's a guy that Pittsburgh's going to have to see whether or not they want to commit to him long term.
Yeah.
The final guy that I've got on here, Stein's probably happy about this, but that's...
Well, not in my fantasy team.
Yeah, that's Michael Thomas, is the number one, probably the wide receiver 1 off everyone's draft boards in fantasy going into this season. Just a great start to his career, the 4,000-yard seasons in his first 4 seasons. Last year, broke the reception record, like 1,700 yards receiving. And then he gets injured week 1 with an ankle injury, had a hamstring injury, some altercation with some teammates.
Punches a dude, yeah.
Yeah, only played in 7 games this season. And in those 7 games, just 40 receptions for 438 yards and no touchdowns.
Yeah, that's the glaring number. And you even put it in bold on our script, is 0 touchdowns. A guy that's fantasy 1, last year was offensive player of the year in the NFL. Just a guy who really kind of, you could say this was a off year, maybe injuries had a huge part in that. It's gonna be interesting is going forward too, because he's got he's Drew Brees is probably leaving, and then in his playoff game, which he's notoriously hasn't been good in the playoffs, but in the playoffs game, you and I had as many catches as he did in the playoff game.
A big old goose egg. And like you said, with Drew Brees leaving, Taysom Hill could be the starting quarterback.
Jameis?
I don't think... If Taysom Hill is starting, I think that's really bad for Michael Thomas in terms of his value.
Shoot, I might be trying to trade him.
Jameis, on the other hand, with the gunslinger that he is, you'll be okay. But Taysom, with his kind of run-first mentality, there could be some trouble when you got a tight end starting at quarterback.
Yep.
But... let's move on to our final segment, which is going to be some of these memorable moments from this past season. We highlighted just a couple moments that we, when we were thinking back on the 2020 NFL season, some things that struck us. So we'll just run through those real quick, and then we'll finish out with a little bonus prediction for you guys. We're already over an hour in, Stein. I feel like we've been talking for 15 minutes.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I know. It goes by so fast, and I try not to look at the clock. But some of the memorable moments. So obviously, this season's probably going to be one of the most memorable, probably for good and bad reasons ever. Mostly COVID. I made the joke earlier to Roach. We were watching they were showing some highlights of Russell Wilson, and I was like, we're gonna always be able to tell what season these highlights are from on ESPN because we look in the stands and there's no one in the stands.
Either no fans or limited capacity.
Yeah, very little fans in the stands. It's gonna be funny because in maybe 10, 15 years we're gonna be watching, with someone who's gonna be like, why are there no fans there? And we'll be like, that was the COVID season, yeah. So hopefully the single COVID season and not COVID seasons, but we had some weird scheduling snafus going on. Some teams had to move around.
Yeah, the Titans were one of the big
Titans,
ones.
The Ravens, the Steelers. I think the Steelers were part of the Ravens, so I don't think that was on them.
I would say they were mainly affected because it was in the division, but
because one team was hurt, the team that was playing them or the team that just played them, that messed up schedule too. Contact tracing, testing, those are all just buzzwords we heard, so much going in, and we had some interesting matchups on weekdays, which was really cool. I don't want it going forward, but it was nice to have.
A game played on every single day of the week for the first time ever. So we had 2 Tuesday games, 1 Wednesday game, and then Christmas Day falling on Friday. There's usually a Christmas game, so we had a Friday game this year in addition to the usual Thursday night football, the Saturday games towards the end of the season when college football is over, and then your normal Sunday and Monday night football.
Yeah, Monday night football, which ain't what it used to be, and we'll talk about that down the road. Tuesday night football, which was weird. Those were the weird Tuesday and Wednesday games. Thursday night football, which I'm never going to complain about having Thursday night football because we didn't get March Madness and other sporting events. So I'll always be thankful for Thursday night football, and then just Saturday games scheduled, and then Sunday, of course. Just an interesting schedule. We'll see. There's so much logistics in the NFL, and hopefully we'll be able to get the vaccine. Not us, but hopefully eventually you and I can get it. But you and I, we're not in any rush to get it because we're in our 20s. Hopefully these guys and their families can get the vaccines. The coaches, all the staffs can get it, so we can have. I want a normal. The week starts on Sunday. We got Sunday at 1, Sunday at 4, and one Sunday at 7 or 8. One Monday night game. Except for week 1 where we have 2 Monday night games. Remember that?
Yep.
And then one random Thursday night like Jacksonville versus the Titans.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I don't want even though it was interesting, I don't want Saturday, I don't want Tuesday, and I don't want Wednesday football.
Yeah.
Or Friday football.
But just a testament to the NFL for even though they had to shuffle around a couple of games in a couple of weeks in terms of the matchups, that with college football they had all sorts of postponements and cancellations. They were able to play every single regular season game. And
I'm sure the league office literally was rubbing their foreheads, wiping the sweat off on Super Bowl Sunday when the kickoff happened, and they realized that they got through an entire season without a single cancellation, even though some teams were literally backs against the wall, the Ravens and the Broncos, at two separate points about what they were going to do. So just a great overall effort by the league, and really, shows that we can stick it to this god-awful damn pandemic.
Yep. And probably going into some of the other memorable moments, probably the most memorable play, I'd say, from this whole 2020 season, because it's even got its own nickname for the play.
It's a good play when it has its own nickname, and literally the nickname came the night of it, was the Hail Murray, Kyler Murray throwing it to DeAndre Hopkins in the end zone against a good Buffalo Bills team in an empty Arizona stadium. Kind of sad no one was able to really celebrate that, but just you and I were watching that live. Mm-hmm. Awesome play. So let's kind of break down a little bit. We don't have the play in front of us, but we can kind of talk about it. Was the Bills scored right before,
That's what they ended up getting a 21-yard touchdown pass from Josh Allen to Stephon Diggs, take a 30-26 lead with 34 seconds left. A play that's really going to be forgotten because it was a great throw by Josh Allen. Stephon Diggs makes a nice sliding catch right on the sideline in the front of the end zone to take the lead, and we were like, man, Josh Allen, like, just that connection's so good.
Yeah.
And then Kyler, they end up taking over, go get a couple plays, and then 11 seconds left. They go for the Hail Mary. Kyler's going to his left. He avoids a sack, almost gets sacked on the play. It would have been game over.
Throws from the sideline.
Yeah,
I mean, literally makes the throw on the sideline.
And then DeAndre Hopkins, 3 defenders in the area for the Bills, a couple behind Hopkins, 1 in front, and DeAndre Hopkins ends up jumping over all of them.
Kind of just jump perfectly. You know, just the quintessential Aaron Rodgers-esque Hail Mary. It was beautiful to watch. And then, of course, you know, there was an image taken. DeAndre Hopkins is wearing his Jordan gloves. All the other guys wearing their
the different
Adidas
brands.
or Under Armour or Nike gloves, and it just kind of you can see the Jordan gloves above all the other ones. I think especially because they were black Jordan gloves compared to the other white gloves from all the cornerbacks. So that was probably the most memorable play of the season. I would say. You know, there were a couple other those. Let's talk about.
I'd say that's number 1. Probably number 2 for me. It's between this and one other play, but the Jets-Raiders wild finish with Greg Williams dialing up the cover 0 in the final seconds of the game. Week 13, Jets-Raiders. So the Raiders end up having an incomplete pass in the end zone. It ends up being a turnover on downs, 1:37 left on the clock. The Jets at that point were leading 28-24. They were 0-11 at the time,
they were going
looking for their first win of the season.
Especially because the Raiders just got their asses kicked by the Falcons, which I think is hilarious.
And so the Jets get the ball back after the turnover on downs. They run the ball, keep the clock moving, punt the ball back to the Raiders with just 35 seconds left on the clock. Raiders run a couple plays. We're down to 13 seconds now. The Jets send 7, bring an 8th guy. The Raiders have 3 receivers going out, so everyone's in single coverage. Henry Ruggs ends up just basically doing a slant and go or like a post and go.
Honestly,
he makes
just beats him.
Yeah, it was one cut inside, and then he just went straight up field, and the Jets corner gets absolutely burnt. Derek Carr puts the ball on the money, 46-yard touchdown pass, 5 seconds left in the game. The Raiders end up winning 31-28. It was the first time in that situation that a team has brought that many guys with that lead, that little time on the clock at that point in the field. It's just still a question to this day why Greg Williams would bring that many guys in that situation.
Yeah, he's going to be a college coordinator someplace after that one. He's not going back to the Shield. Staying in New York, another play, I don't think we have it on here, was just kind of a stupid little play I want to talk about is Daniel Jones falling down.
Yeah. That was kind of like an honorable mention play for me, and I think it was a Thursday night game where it happened. It was prime time, I remember that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Daniel Jones going into open field, going to be a long touchdown run, and then gets tripped up by like the 10-yard line.
Yeah. Another big play was Derrick Henry baptizing Josh Norman.
Yeah, the best part about it, not only the stiff arm that just sent him to the earth's core, but there was offsetting penalties on the play, so the run didn't even count, and it was like a 3-yard run on the play.
Yeah,
but yeah, Josh Norman definitely getting embarrassed on that run.
He ain't what he used to be, and that's kind of just shows that Derrick Henry is kind of taken over as the quintessential running back.
That's what another little funny moment, the Lamar Jackson poop scandal, you could say.
Paul Gate. Of course, you add Gate to anything in the NFL.
Paul Pierce says, so that Week 14 game against the Browns, personnel for the Ravens said that he left the game because of cramps.
We saw the camera angle of him running to the locker room. You know,
people are saying, I've seen that poop run before.
He's got the poop run. I mean, I don't know. You know, it's funny in their playoff game. He kind of went back, but he's like, he actually got hurt. Yeah, that was concussion stuff.
Then going on to one of a more notable play, I'd say between this and the Jets one was like the second most notable play from the season.
Raiders are on here a lot.
Yeah, Ryan Fitzpatrick's blind throw on the face mask where he almost gets his head torn off. Week 16, Dolphins Raiders. So a bunch of offense in the final couple minutes of that game. There's an 85-yard touchdown pass to the Raiders to take the lead. The Dolphins respond with a 59-yard touchdown reception. The big part of that game, a missed extra point on that 85-yard touchdown pass. So the Dolphins are up 23-22.
Who's the Raiders kicker?
Daniel Carlson.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so missed extra point. The Raiders end up getting the ball back. They have a chance to get a Josh Jacobs touchdown, but they decide to try and run the clock. They kick a field goal with 19 seconds left, 25-23 lead. Then Ryan Fitzpatrick gets the ball back. A 34-yard throw, like I said, getting the face mask grab, turned sideways,
head was backwards.
Head backwards, can't see, blown coverage by the Raiders secondary. The 34-yard catch plus the 15-yard face mask penalty sets the Dolphins up in field goal range. Jason Sanders nails a 44-yard field goal, and the Dolphins win 26-25. So just a wild finish, a bunch of big plays on offense
and
in terms of touchdowns.
And a game that shouldn't have been like that. Just the Dolphins-Raiders at the beginning of the season, you'd be like, oh, no, that wouldn't be anything.
Yeah, so just another great moment on the season. Switching to more of a sad moment for any sort of Atlanta Falcons fans.
We can skip this part.
I'll just quickly run over it. Just the multiple blown leads in the second half of ball games, just having big leads. You saw early on in the season, the onside kick where no one jumped on it against the Cowboys. The Bears game up 26-10 with 7 minutes to go, lose that one. And you mentioned the Giants game, or not the Giants, the Lions game with Todd Gurley falling into the end zone, and then they end up losing that one. So just
good
a
you didn't
heartbreaking.
Mention the Bucs halftime lead, but we won't talk about that.
Yeah, just a bunch of heartbreaking second half losses for the Falcons.
I would say usually I get really anxious for these games, but week 3 against the Bears, I actually did have a panic attack. No, I'm not kidding. Against watching the Bears, I was like, I knew this was going to happen. So
see, that's the sad thing, is that it's almost comical at this point because Falcons fans just know, if they have a lead,
especially they brought in freaking Nick Foles. I was like, yeah, this game's over.
Yeah. Another great moment was DK Metcalf running down Budda Baker on an interception from Russell Wilson at the goal line. DK hits almost 23 miles per hour. A 230-pound guy going 23 miles per hour. Chases down Budda Baker, another guy, one of the fastest guys in the league. I think he hit 21 miles per hour. Made up 10 yards on it, tackled him inside the 10. But that was another one where Twitter just went absolutely crazy.
Which is, he's a huge guy, but Julio's done that before. So let's not make that a big moment.
Stein, it was a big moment, especially on social media. It's not going to be like when you're talking about top moments from the 2020 season. It's this was the best moment from the season. But in terms of all the hype and stuff from it happening, that was a big moment from this past season. Another one, Tyreek Hill's touchdown. That was a touchdown catch, but it wasn't ruled that way because he didn't realize he caught the ball. In a Week 12 game against the Broncos, he had a potential 40-yard touchdown pass. The ball gets tipped in the air, and then him and the defender both fall to the ground. The ball just lands in between his arm and his chest, but he didn't realize that. The refs didn't call it a touchdown. He goes to the sideline. The Chiefs end up punting the ball away. They're showing the replays on TV and on the big screen. It shows the ball never touched the ground. And they end up not, like I said, it wasn't ruled touchdown. The Chiefs punted the ball so quickly that Andy Reid couldn't challenge it. He got mad at Tyreek on the sideline because he's like, why didn't you tell me to challenge that? And Tyreek's response kind of like a shrug. He's like, I didn't realize that I caught it. So just another kind of quirky moment from this past season. 2 more left. We've mentioned this a couple of times to kind of run through it quickly. How bad the NFC East was. They were 23-40 overall on the season with a 365 winning percentage. 11-28 outside of the division, so just a 282.282 winning percentage. So just even worse when they couldn't beat up on each other. Just a historically bad 7-9 won the division. All the teams were terrible. And then the final one, once again, kind of bring up some Super Bowl recap. Tom Brady, after 20 seasons in New England, leaving the Patriots, going to the Buccaneers, still ends up getting his 7th Super Bowl. Just a great season for him, being able to bring along Brock Gronkowski out of retirement. And
put all the, I hate to say it, but put all the criticisms that he's a system quarterback to rest.
Yeah.
And what I hate is that this is going to bring up the debate. Is Brady, going to be the greatest athlete of all time? We already know he's the best. The goats. He's the best of the football players, but is he the GOAT of the GOATs? And I don't want to even start thinking about what ESPN is going to start putting out. But, props to Brady. And we saw him celebrating, yesterday, the day before.
A little too much avocado,
a little too much
tequila.
Drinking, but, he earned that. And I even was funny. He was on the back of a boat throwing the Lombardi like it was a beer from a buddy to a buddy on a boat.
He's like, oh, I got 6 other of these.
Yeah, imagine if he would have dropped it. They would have had to get like a dive team to go get the damn Lombardi.
But yeah, so those are some of the great moments from this past season. I'm sure there's a couple others that we missed, but those were just a couple of highlights from the season. Before we end up finishing out this episode number 2, I thought it'd be kind of fun, Stein, just to a little way too early Super Bowl prediction.
I'm gonna write this down
for 2021. Yeah, write it down just as
memento.
Yeah, just in
it can
case
be
it
ridiculous.
actually happens.
Yeah, it can be ridiculous if it does.
And I think both of us kind of didn't want to go with the traditional Chiefs and Bucks. It's going to be a repeat from last season. So.
Yeah, even though you could make a case for both teams. Brady isn't going anywhere. I wish he was, but he isn't. My way too early prediction is I think the Browns.
Okay.
I really want to see the Browns in the Super Bowl, even
Make
if
it to
they
the playoffs for the first time. Won a playoff game for the first time in a long time.
I think they now the next logical step is to get there, get to the AFC Championship game. It's going to be a hard one, but you got to win that, and I like to see them in it. And then going against a team that we talked about earlier, the Packers.
Yep. I like it. Like I said, it's not the Chiefs Bucks. It's something outside the box, something that a lot of people won't say.
I mean, my super ridiculous one would be Washington versus the Raiders.
I was gonna say, you could say Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Jacksonville versus the Lions next year, but try and be
Texans
at least
somehow miss.
somewhat realistic.
Yeah.
Browns Packers. I'm going Rams Bills. The Rams signing Matthew Stafford.
I do think the Rams will be a hot off-season team.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people already betting on them to win. I think besides the Bucks, they're the second most bet on team to win the Super Bowl next season, besides the Bucks and Chiefs.
Yeah.
Because the addition of Matthew Stafford already won the big QB offseason
Aaron Donald's
move.
still performing at a high level.
Yep. They really sold out on this next season.
I would say the only thing they're lacking is just a definite definitely wide receiver one and their defense was great. I just think they just need to improve their offense.
Yeah, 100%. And I think with signing Stafford, they'll have a full season of Cam Akers. They'll be able to do just that. And then the Buffalo Bills, a team that went to the AFC title game this past season.
Yeah,
you talked about Josh Allen, how he could be a future MVP candidate. And I don't see why not they could knock off the Chiefs next season. So I've got Rams, Bills. And then you got Browns Packers. So
Packers.
Like I said, we'll keep that down, see if that ends up happening.
Yep.
And just say, we predicted the Super Bowl already.
Exactly.
If it ends up happening.
So we're a little bit going over time, guys. But next episode will be our 3rd episode, and we'll probably be going through each team, and definitely going to give an NFC report card. We'll probably do that 3rd show, and then 4th show we'll probably do an AFC report card and just kind of talk about every team, like how they act, what happened, and we might even think about starting team needs and stuff like that. But that's just the future, and we'll definitely talk about the quarterback carousel.
Yeah, that's what we'll get into. A little more recap from this past season, and then looking more into next season, kind of breaking down teams, breaking down divisions, conferences.
Yeah.
But that's what's going to be on the docket for the next couple episodes. Of course, we'll keep y'all updated on Instagram for all of our updates in terms of what we're going to be talking about each and every episode. And
we didn't even talk about the awards. So next show we'll talk about the award winners for those people out there, and the Hall of Fame inductees, which we were posting on Instagram. So a lot of guys who really deserve to get enshrined got it. So
but anyways, guys, that's gonna do it for our episode 2 of the Couch Quarterbacks podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in once again. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and tune in for episode number 3, which will be coming out next week. We'll see you guys on the flip side.
See you guys.